Governor Quinn gets ready for his inauguration to a full term, while the General Assembly deals with some big last-minute issues. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. It's a busy time of transition in state government and federal government too. And with me to talk about a lot of what's going on at the Statehouse today, a couple of people who know what's happening over there and been there for a while. Mary Massingale, who is now with Illinois Statehouse News at the Capitol. Welcome back, Mary.
Thank you, Bernie. And
Charlie Wheeler, Director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at University of Illinois Springfield, which provides interns, graduate student interns to the news bureaus at the Statehouse, and also a longtime Chicago Sun-Times reporter at the Statehouse for a few years before that, Charlie Wheeler. Charlie, welcome back.
Thank you, Bernie.
As we tape this show, late in the week, but the General Assembly may be going later, so we are going with the information we have at this point, where negotiations have been going on for a possible tax increase in this lame duck session, which will end, let's see, the governor gets inaugurated Monday and other constitutional officers, but the General Assembly doesn't change to the new membership until noon on Wednesday. Sometime before Wednesday, do we think we'll see a tax increase pass? Charlie, what do you think?
I think all signs are heading that way. I think anyone who looks at the state's budget situation objectively realizes that the state really does need more revenue. Either that or you have to make draconian cuts. I don't sense that the appetite is out there among people who understand the depth of cutting that would needed in order to bring things into balance, that there isn't a sentiment for cutting roughly half of the operations budget, because the deficit is roughly half of what our operating budget is. And so I think there is the growing realization that we may have to increase taxes, probably income tax, perhaps expand the sales tax base, all the kind of stuff that's been talked about for, what, 5 years, 7 years, for a very long time. And a lot of people, myself included, figured that this would have happened, oh, maybe even a decade ago, when it became obvious that the state's finances weren't keeping up with our legitimate obligations, particularly in the areas of healthcare, human services, what we want to do for local schools. Right. The revenue structure just doesn't produce the money. And then with the recession, we've actually seen losses of multi-billions of dollars in terms of tax collections from year to year.
Yeah, interestingly, and of course we had Rod Blagojevich come in as governor nearly a decade ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's 8 years ago now, and then he came in with a pledge not to raise income taxes, seemingly no matter what happened, even as he increased programs. Mary, and so that's exacerbated things more, and then he wanted some business taxes that nobody went for, because by that time they didn't trust him to give him any money to play with. Mary, it has been, at least for during the election seasons that have just ended, of course there's like a perpetual election season in Illinois. Speaker Madigan of the House in particular has said we need some Republican votes in order to pass a tax increase because we don't want it to be all Democratic. I think there might be a thawing in that maybe the Democrats in control might pass everything without Republican help. Do you think that's possible still, or what's it looking like over there?
Well, Speaker Madigan has repeatedly said that he wants Republican votes on any type of a tax increase. He doesn't want the Democrats to wear the jacket solely. He was on the Senate floor working the votes yesterday, getting a feel for things. And it was funny watching. There was Steve Brown, his spokesman, and Donnie Trotter, who was the budget expert in the Senate, were making trips back and forth between the House yesterday. So I thought something was going to happen yesterday, but it didn't. I agree with Charlie. We will have an income tax increase. I don't think it'll happen until next week. And how much of an increase will happen? It's been bandied about. Now it's up to 2 or 2.25 percentage points,
right.
Which it had started at 1, which was what Quinn had campaigned on. And I have also heard that the corporate income tax could possibly go up to 8% from 7.3% now. Right. We'll just have to see what happens.
Okay, just an interesting point here. The individual income tax in Illinois right now is 3%. You know, the federal income tax is what, depending on your bracket, can be in the 20s. Yeah. But it's 3% of your income. It could go up to 5% if there's a 2 percentage point increase. But the folks who don't want taxes, they will clearly easily call it, that's a 66% tax increase. Are you crazy? Quinn, have you broken your word that you only wanted the 1%, which is a 33% tax increase? Perception, Charlie, is it, I mean, that kind of gets in the way when new campaigns are coming up. You know, people will be filing at the end of this year to run again in the 2012 election. Yeah,
and it's a challenge, but I would point to the fact in the most recent election, at a time when this whole notion that government is too big, government is evil, we have to rein it in, was running rampant across the country. There were a number of people in Illinois who voted for tax increases both in the Senate and the House in 2009. Most of those people were reelected.
Not all.
Not all. But for example, in the House, there were 5 Democrats who were defeated. 4 of them voted no on the income tax increase. In the Senate, there was 1 Democrat defeated who voted for the income tax increase. All the others who had challenges were reelected, including some in very tight races.
Was that Senator DeMuzio?
Senator DeMuzio.
Deanna DeMuzio of Carlinville.
Was the only one, yeah, from Carlinville. Senator Bond from Elgin, who was in a very close race with, from my perspective, probably the most qualified Republican challenger on the ballot, former State Senator Steve Rauschenberger. Yeah, he won, despite having voted for a tax increase.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it makes you wonder what's going on here.
Yeah, and of course, Governor Quinn, even though he said it was 1 percentage point, which would have raised the individual income tax rate to 4%. Although his surcharge for education. He also won re-election running against Bill Brady, the state senator from Bloomington, who was adamantly anti-tax. And I guess all of this talk about the state being $10 to $15 billion in debt did drive some voters to the Democrats saying, yeah, we're going to need to make some hard choices.
But Quinn only won by about 32,000 votes, so.
Yeah, but
it was close.
but the way election works.
If you win, you win.
32,000 is just as good as 3 million.
This is true.
It's a mandate. It's a mandate.
Yeah.
There are, there have been some reforms on the table at the General Assembly, including reforming Medicaid, because people say that's kind of a runaway spending program because it's so expensive, and maybe there haven't been, certainly some people think, enough checks and balances on who gets the benefit and if eligibility of people gets checked annually and things like that. And so there's, I know it already passed the Senate and may have passed the House as we speak here. Where does that sit, and how does that help the budget debate?
The governor will sign it. I don't know if it's going to help the budget debate that much. It's estimated to save about $800 million over the next 5 years.
And this is by tightening eligibility and checking?
The big cost saver in the bill is moving half of the state's 2.8 million Medicaid recipients into a managed care system, much like an HMO. But they have 4 years to do that. They also are tightening eligibility, cracking down on checking down if you're an Illinois resident. They're also
that would be useful.
Yes, they're cracking down on. Trying to go after people who scam the system. Although Donnie Trotter in debate yesterday in committee questioned how do you go after an indigent person if they're scamming the system.
Right. And Trotter, of course, is the
budget expert in the Senate.
Yeah, Democrat from Chicago.
Right. And it also it makes a very transformational trend towards long-term care. They're lumping all the nursing home and long-term care for the geriatric, developmentally disabled, and mentally ill into one line item, one global budget, as opposed to being in different agencies throughout the state. And they have the authority to take 4% of that budget, which is up to $100 million annually, and put it into community-based care. The nursing homes do not like that.
But that will allow some people to stay in their homes
Yes, it will.
with personal helpers they can hire, or the families can hire.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Well, the interesting thing about the whole Medicaid program is that people look at welfare, and you have the stereotype of the lazy welfare mom sitting at home watching television, making babies, which is totally divorced from reality. The majority of the people who are in the Medicaid population receiving benefits are in fact children and their mothers. The majority of the money that is spent on senior citizens and people with disabilities. And the average cost of someone who's elderly or who has disabilities to the Medicaid program is like 4 or 5 times what the average cost is for a family. And you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. Older people have more problems. People with disabilities need more specialized care. And so the idea that we're going to save a whole lot of money by putting the people who spend proportionately less money in managed care, I'm not sure that'll work out. As a matter of fact, when the governor's board to study state spending, remember Pat Quinn appointed this task force right after he got in to look at ways to save money, and they suggested going to managed care. Some of the people who were on that panel dissented, and they were people who had some expertise in the area, and were pointing out, well, you know, we're already spending less per person than some of these states that have gone to managed care.
Interesting. Although
And so whether or not that'll work remains to be seen.
Yeah.
The idea of trying to care for people in their home as opposed to caring for them in a nursing home makes a lot of sense. Nursing home care is a lot more expensive. But then the question is, who's going to do the providing in the community? As things stand now, we owe millions and millions of dollars to community care providers because we haven't paid them.
That was
And you
brought
have the
up.
same problem with, not to interrupt, but with checking on people's eligibility. One of the reasons that we don't check on people's eligibility more frequently is we don't have enough caseworkers to do it.
And they
You
keep
have
wanting to
people-
cut staff.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have people whose responsibility this is, who have maybe a caseload of in excess of 1,000 people. How the heck can you check on 1,000 people and keep tabs? Who's still needs this assistance? Who's already back on their own feet and really doesn't deserve this or need this anymore?
If people have to file annually to prove up their eligibility, I guess that's a good thing, but again, you need some staff to look over those documents.
Exactly, and caseworkers are overloaded. And Charlie brought up a good point. Moving to the community-based care is a goal, but right now I don't know if we have that infrastructure in the community to do that.
Okay, interesting. Well, obviously there are some other legislative issues we'll deal with, but we also have the inauguration coming up Monday of Governor Quinn and the other state officers, including a couple of Republicans now will be part of the mix again after an all-Democratic administration, with Judy Bartopinka as comptroller, the former treasurer, and Dan Rutherford, state senator from the Pontiac area, becoming state treasurer now. Any thoughts on, there will be, they keep saying there's no tax money involved in the events in Springfield. What do we think Pat Quinn will be telling us, and how upbeat can one be, and how much should one be partying in these austere times?
I suggest he'll look at some of the things that he will see as positive that have been accomplished under his brief term as the sort of accidental governor. And he'll lay out what he hopes to do in the future. And I assume that his future vision will be very heavily on populist initiatives. For example, he'll probably talk about having an open primary, talk about having an ethics initiative, some of the things that are his favorites, talk about being more environmentally conscious.
Even his placards for the campaign were green.
Green, yes. Yeah. And he'll look at some of the things that were accomplished in the last 2 years since he's been governor. And I personally think that there are major things that have occurred. I look at some of the ethics reforms that deal very specifically with the problems of Rod Blagojevich in terms of procurement, in terms of pay for play, in terms of, for the first time ever, having campaign contribution limits. I think those are positive steps. I look at some of the changes we've made in education. We haven't done the reforms that all the reformers want or all the editorial boards want. You know, we're not in utopia yet.
In other words, yeah, we're not.
But on the other hand, just a simple little thing like for the first time ever, looking at a kid when he starts in kindergarten and following that kid's progress all the way through, rather than looking at today's kindergartners and compare them to yesterday's kindergartners and say, oh, this tells you whether we're making progress. I think that's goofy. It's just not statistically sound. But we're going to have the capacity to track kids from day one and see, does Johnny, now that he's in first grade, did he learn anything in kindergarten? Now that he's in second grade, did he learn anything in first grade? And I think that's very good. And the results of those individual assessments are going to factor in to evaluations of teachers. I think that's a positive thing. So I think Quinn will look back and say, here are some of the things that have occurred in the brief period that I was governor, albeit accidentally. Well, he won't say accidentally, but and here's where I hope we can move in the future.
Right. Now, on the education point, there's been some talk of major reforms like making it easier to fire teachers, making it harder for teachers to get tenure, and having more charter schools where unions have either no hold or less of a hold. But those things seem to be put off because the two major teachers unions have been very opposed to those, correct?
Correct.
Well, we actually did substantially increase the number of charter schools.
Oh, did we double that?
We more than doubled. I'll probably get the number wrong, so I'm not going to throw it out. I'll throw it out anyway. I think it's something like 150 charter schools we can have now.
Okay. Well, I'll take back that part.
That's going on.
But the tenure thing is still there. Yeah.
Yeah. The tenure thing is an issue. For many years, when I first started reporting, teachers could get tenure after 2 years. As part of the deal in '97, when we increased funding for education, one of the reforms was that tenure became a 4-year process. So I guess now they want to extend it out, what, Mary, to 5 or 6?
I think they want to make it a little bit tougher to get tenure. I haven't heard a specific figure. I know the unions have proposed their own counter proposal where they want to allow a teacher to have portable tenure if they go to a different district instead of having to start all over again and get your 4 years so you have tenure, that after 2 years of good evaluations they can get tenure. And of course, the supposedly draft proposal put forth in the House called for a limit on the ability to strike, which is a major component of organized labor, which teachers' unions are. They will not want to.
Yeah, this is what the reformers want. Yeah,
they will not want to give up the right to strike. And I can't see that going in Illinois, where organized labor is so strong.
And none of this is likely to happen until after the new General Assembly comes in later. Well, next week we're going to see some pomp and ceremony. Now, just as far as that ceremony goes, obviously Speaker Madigan, the Democratic in charge of the House for most of the last 3 decades, and President John Cullerton, also of Chicago, the Senate President, both will be reelected. Both will have slightly fewer members on their sides, but still the majorities in each of their houses. So does this change anything significantly in terms of where the state is going? Or, we have a Democratic administration, Democratic governor, a couple new members of the constitutional offices. The 2 financial officers will be Republicans now. Any big changes in where we're going?
I'm not sure. As you say, Democrats control the legislature and the governorship. It is interesting to note how Madigan has been putting forth constitutional amendments, which it's a long road to hoe to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot through the legislature, since 3/5 majority vote is required to get it out of both houses of the legislature, and then it goes to the voters. But he's been asking for fiscal restraints by having capping increases in spending from the general funds to tie it to increases in per capita income for the state of Illinois, as well as wanting to have a 3/5 majority vote for the legislature or any governmental unit or body, even school districts, to increase any type of pension. Now, whether these will go anywhere, I don't know, but it's interesting to watch him put these forth.
Yeah. Charlie, is that a ruse, or are those real serious proposals that will go somewhere?
I honestly don't know. Generally, Mike Madigan doesn't, what would you say, propose constitutional amendments as ruses.
Yeah.
And
usually he doesn't testify for things unless they have a good chance of passing.
Unless he's serious about them. I personally disagree with him. I think that notion of having a constitutional amendment to tie the hands of the legislature is not a good idea, even though there are certain safety valves in there that the governor and the treasurer and the comptroller can declare an emergency, or the legislature could do it by extraordinary majority. I think the difficulty is, I guess it gets down to, what do you want the state to do? How much of a safety net do you want the state to provide? How much support do you want for education? If we were to decide, for example, okay, education at the college level should be an individual matter. We won't fund any more schools. You know, I'd be out of a job, I suppose. But that would be a way to save a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Or if we were to decide it's people's responsibility to take care of their own health care, and so we're going to get out of the business of providing health care for people, we could save a lot of money. And so the question is, which of these services, in a sense, do the haves feel some, what would you say, maybe not obligation, but some compassion to provide to the have-nots? Mm-hmm. And how much are they going to be willing to pay for it? And I think the notion of tying increases to personal income, when the haves maybe aren't doing so well and the have-nots are really suffering, the need to help the people on the low end grows. Yeah. In bad economic times, as you guys know, we have to spend more on social services. Understood. And this type of an amendment would make this more difficult to do. So I don't think it's a good idea.
But the Speaker Madigan is always about strategy. And I can remember when I was your student in the PAR program, you mentioned once that Madigan has one job and one job only. It's to get Democrats elected and to keep them in mm-hmm. office.
You know how many people could say that, Charlie? You've had a few students over the years.
But it's true. And yet, another issue that's coming up in the legislature we haven't talked about yet on the show tonight is that this is a redistricting year. Mm-hmm. And the Democrats are going to control the whole shebang. So mm-hmm. probably for the first time in his career, Madigan is in, well, not the first time because they've controlled redistricting before, but he's certainly in a very good position to be able to help elect House Democrats next time around.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. One important issue to Central Illinois, because it involves a giant project that could be in Taylorville, is called Tenaska. It's an energy company that wants to build they call it a clean coal electric plant in Taylorville. But in order to move forward with that project, which would bring thousands of jobs, they have to get legislative approvals that would allow them to sell their power and order the other utilities to buy it and cap it at 2% raises per year, I guess, to homes. But businesses would have to pay more, and so the opponents, including some of the big utilities in Illinois, mm-hmm. say, "Hey, that'll kill more jobs than the whole thing will bring." And in at least the first vote that Senator DiMuzio brought before the Senate, it fell a few votes short. I think 5 votes short. Mm-hmm. So it looks like maybe that won't happen as we're here today. Any thoughts about the politics of this? It's one of those very interesting issues that's important to an area of the state, but boy, there were lots of lobbyists on both sides descending on the Statehouse and paid for by the utility company and this Tenaska company.
There are a huge number of lobbyists for this issue. I mean, if you would wait outside the executive committees where the bill was being heard, it was clogged with lobbyists.
Good for the suit business.
Yes, it is. Cell phones and suits roaming the Capitol. I don't know if that's going to come back. When it was voted on in the House, it failed the first time, and so Frank Montino, who was a sponsor, a Democrat from Spring Valley, he pulled it from consideration. It came back later, and they passed it. I don't know if it'll come back in the Senate.
Okay. There's another issue that is ongoing as we speak, and it's unfortunate, but Laura Lynn Ryan, the former First Lady mm-hmm. of Illinois, was put in intensive care as she's fighting lung cancer that I believe has spread, and George Ryan has been petitioning to get out of federal prison. He's only halfway through his 6.5-year term. Hadn't happened as we're here today. It's just unfortunate. Laura Lynn Ryan was always in the middle of this firestorm of negativity about her husband. I think she was a classy First Lady, and it's just an unfortunate situation. Thoughts are welcome, but
I think some compassion could be used, at least to allow him to visit her. Yeah. From what I hear, she's on her, it could be hours. They're a very devoted couple, and she was a very classy First Lady. Charlie?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, I've discussed this with people out of school, and there's some people who say, hey, that's tough. You do the crime, you do the time. Why should he get special treatment because he's the governor? Were I in a position to be the one who is giving the orders, I would make it available not just to George Ryan, but to any federal prison inmate whose wife of 50 years is, on her deathbed, or anyone else who has a very close family member who's on a deathbed. I wouldn't, free him permanently, but apparently there is a program available in the federal prisons for these types of extraordinary situations where a close family member is dying, that a prisoner can be, put on like home arrest until the time that the passing is completed, then they just go back to jail.
Interesting. Well, on a little less heavy subject, it looks like Illinois will have another connection, Washington. We've only got a couple minutes left, but Bill Daley, former Commerce Secretary in the Clinton administration, has now been tapped by President Obama to be the next Chief of Staff in the White House, Rahm Emanuel. And you hear, oh, the Chicago way. I'll bet there's one columnist in Chicago that's been saying that. But good thing or bad thing for Illinois or for the country? Brother of Mayor Daley, who of course is stepping down after this April's election. I
think it's a good thing. Bill Daley, he started Advance Illinois, which is an education advocacy group with bipartisan with former Governor
Jim
Edgar.
That's right. Yeah. He's had some. In our newspaper there have been a couple of dual written commentaries about what we need to do for our schools.
Yeah, I think Bill Daley would do a good job.
Yeah, I would concur with that.
Okay, and one other name from the past, Tony Resco, still sitting in a federal prison, but apparently his sentencing has been delayed from late January until sometime in the fall, which means it raises the possibility he could testify at this summer's retrial of Governor Rod Blagojevich. Is this something Rod Blagojevich should look forward to?
I doubt it, but this will make for a very interesting retrial.
If that happens.
If it happens. That will be very interesting.
Yeah, it occurs to me that it's a clear signal that they intend to use him, and they're saying to him, we won't decide what sentence we're going to ask for until we find out what you can tell us.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes, and we'll have to leave it till the next time. Mary Massingale and Charlie Wheeler, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.